Radio Espial is a series of podcasts brought to you across the internet by TIPM Media. Presented by investigative journalist Mick Rooney, it covers a host of topics from international media, publishing, aviation, and technology. Thank you for listening to this podcast today.
You're very welcome to episode 9 of Radio Espial. Let's take it away. Again, we've another great guest lined up for you. Tonight we're going to be talking about publishing, self-publishing, printing and technology. I'll talk about my guest in just a second. Very glad to have you all along. www.radioespial.com is where you can find us. Away we go. This episode we're going to be talking to Jeremy Thompson of Troubador Publishing and the Matador self-publishing imprint. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the company and our guest tonight in just 1 second. Okay, if you're joining us for the first time, wherever you're joining us from, iTunes, SoundCloud, wherever, if you've found us on the website, the Independent Publishing Magazine, my own aviation website, wherever you found us from, we're very glad to have you along for this episode 9 of Radio Espial. Just very quickly, Radio Espial is a global internet broadcast with audio and visual. You can see it up there if you're looking at the video cast. Our focus is on media and how it deals with news. Our core areas will always be publishing, aviation, technology, and we do consider other things related in that area if it's a significant aspect of media coverage. Now, first of all, as I said, Jeremy Thompson will be joining us very shortly as a guest. I want to talk to you about, he's managing director of Troubador and the Matador self-publishing imprint. Just very quickly on the company he runs. Troubador has been publishing books since the late 1980s. The company was founded first as University Text. It changed its name to Troubador Publishing Limited in 1986. By the way, it's based in the UK. The Troubador started really as an Italian studies academic publisher, and it has become established as the UK's leading book list in that area when it first started out. During the 1990s, the company concentrated on trade publishing for major international scientific, technology and medical publishers such as Cambridge University Press, Elsevier, Wiley and many others. By the late 1990s, Troubador launched its Matador self-publishing imprint along with an academic journal program, the T2 non-fiction imprint, which was an emerging sort of communications, ethics and social justice book imprint. Troubador eventually sold its academic journals to Emerald in 2008 and continued to expand and build on its own book publishing programs. The Matador self-publishing imprint has established itself as one of the UK's leading self-publishing services providers. Troubador launched also a quarterly self-publishing magazine in 2006, both in print and online, and it also started the annual self-publishing conferences in 2012. When we talk to Jeremy, we'll get a lot more into some of that background. In 2015, Troubador started the website Indigo Services for independent authors, and around about the mid, I think 2015, purchased the Book Guild Limited, which it runs as a separate enterprise. The company aims to provide authors with a range of publishing options, always with the emphasis on quality of production, marketing, distribution and customer services. Now, our guest is the Managing Director, Jeremy Thompson. Jeremy is MD of Troubador Publishing and has over 30 years experience in the publishing industry, having worked with Elsevier, Wiley, Cambridge University Press and many other companies. Jeremy is a regular speaker on all aspects of author services and self-publishing at various events throughout the UK and the world, as diverse as the Westminster Media Forum, the London Book Fair, which is currently going on at the moment this week, and their own self-publishing conference, which is based, I think, in the Leicester University. And yeah, you know, there's even an aviation tint here, because Jeremy also flies a light airplane when the weather allows him to, but we'll leave that bit to the end and concentrate on the publishing and self-publishing and media stuff. Okay, so without further ado, let's go and talk to Jeremy. Okay, we're joined by Jeremy Thompson here on Radio Espial. Jeremy, obviously the Managing Director of Troubador and Matador. Jeremy, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much for having me.
Not at all. I've wanted to have you on as a guest for some time. We've talked to a lot of people in the industry, from authors to people like yourself, and it's always fascinating when we have a guest on. So without further ado, what I like to do, Jeremy, for all the people who are both maybe listening and watching this, just to sort of give us a brief introduction into your early life, where you grew up, just in general, give us a sense of Jeremy.
The long distant past, you mean?
Yes, that long distant past.
I was, well, if you want to go back to the beginning, I was born in Leeds, So I'm a Yorkshireman by heart, I guess, although I've not really ever lived there. My parents moved to Cambridge, then they moved to Singapore, so I spent a year in Singapore. Then we moved back to Cambridge, and really my sort of formative years as a secondary school student and in sixth form were really spent in Cambridge, which was, I have to say, a really nice place to grow up.
Place, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lovely place. I mean, I go back whenever I can. You know, I've lost touch with most people, but it's just a lovely place to visit. Actually, outside tourist season, because it's horrendous in the summer.
As we all grow up, we get to a certain stage when we think we know what we'd like to do in life. So I suppose in those teenage years, when you approach college, had you any idea of what the field that you wanted to get into, where your interests lay?
Yeah. I mean, I did. I mean, I was always keen on the theatre. I was always keen on reading. I think you're right. Sometimes you get a sense from school, sixth form, etc., of the sort of things you like doing, the sort of things you like to study, and I liked both of those. So I then effectively went on and studied. I went to University of London and I studied a combined English drama degree. So I was really keeping a foot in both camps, as it were, because I wanted to keep my options open. This was in the early 1980s, and at the time the theatre was sort of quite down. Musicals were just about to start getting going, and it was difficult to make a living in theatre. And I was really sort of looking at theatre production rather than being on the stage, although I've done some of that. But yeah, I mean, I love theatre, and if things had been different, I may have gone into theatre. I mean, I still do. I still am involved every now and again, sort of on an amateur basis. But it was one of those things that I always wanted to do. And in a way, I've been lucky, I suppose, because as chance had it, my first job happened to be as a journalist. So I sort of went into the literature side, the English literature side, by accident almost, but I've been able to keep my foot in the sort of theatrical side as an amateur, literally for the last 30 years, which has been great because I'm doing what I like doing.
And I suppose the move then into publishing. Obviously, initially, this will be prior to when you set up Troubador. I know you work for a number of different, I think, Wiley, Elsevier, a couple of other book publishing companies.
Yeah, I mean, I started off as I said, as a journalist, and then I moved into sort of magazine editing and journal publishing, and also books associated, and it was I found it a really interesting area, and in a way, sort of life takes over, doesn't it? You get a job, and of course you then sort of get married, and the world moves on, and suddenly you realise that this is your career, and it may not have actually been what you set out to do, but this is something you're doing. Luckily, I enjoyed doing what I was doing, and I was working for various companies. I swapped jobs a few times and worked for various different companies, but there came a point when, I guess for me, I always felt that I didn't really want to work in a big commercial publisher, and I didn't want to be a part of a very small cog in a very large organisation, as it were. And I think, like a lot of people, I'd always wanted to work for myself. I was always wanted to think, well, if the opportunity arose, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Never believing it would happen. And then, of course, the opportunity arose. So, much to sort of my family's, what's the word? Dismay, I think. I decided that I would, because I decided I would go it alone. I decided I would set up on my own, and of course it was going from a stable job, and I could have relocated with the company that was moving. I was in a stable job and I was earning good money, but actually I thought, well, if I don't do this now, I'm never going to do it. So let's do it. Let's take the plunge and we'll see. So I did. I set up on my own.
Excellent. So tell us a little bit then. Obviously, prior to us starting the interview, I gave a little preamble about yourself and Troubador. But just in your words, then talk to me about that, because that's I talked to Paul Cohn, who from Epigraph and Monkfish, who followed a similar path as yourself. Spent a long time in marketing in the book world, and then made that step to go. I'm going to go out on my own and do it.
Yeah.
That's a really big step, and it's, as we all know, it's whether you're an author, whether you're the publisher themselves, it's a very competitive world to get into. So just talk to us a little bit about the early stages of Troubador. Initially, I think it was more sort of an academic publisher, wasn't it, for Italian studies? And
yeah, it was. Yeah, I mean, when I left, I was working. When I sort of struck out on my own, I was working for Bosworth Heinemann, which was an academic publisher. And they were relocating to Oxford, and I didn't want to go to Oxford, so I started on my own. But I was quite lucky in that they were looking for people to take some of the work that was done in-house. They were looking for it to be done out of house. So when I left, I took some work with me, which really formed the basis of what I was going to do. And I think I started like a lot of people. I was doing freelance. I was editing a series of journals. I was producing those same journals. I was working for book publishers. I did what I could to work for as many different publishers as I possibly could to get a good sort of spread of experience. But it was great as far as it went. There came a point when I was tired of working for myself and working on my own, and I felt that I wanted to do something a bit more creative. At that time, I was working for other people. I was doing a task and then sending it back, and that was the end of it. And I felt I wanted to do something that was much more for me, using the skills I had. So I at that point, I sort of started to look at publishing my own books, or publishing books for people. And I started off with an Italian studies series of academic books, which is still going to this day, actually. Although it's a very small part of what we do, but it's a very well known Italian studies series, and that really was the beginning of it actually becoming a publishing company in its own right.
We'll talk a little bit more about Troubador and essentially then the forming of Matador, the self-publishing imprint, and later some of the other developments. Just before that, in a wider discussion, I suppose, about the publishing industry now today and the place of self-publishing within the overall industry. Just your thoughts on, we've seen so many changes. Where are we now, and how's it sort of developed, and how do you see it now?
Yeah, that's a big question, isn't it? I mean, it's come an awful way. It really has. When I first started in the self-publishing field, which was in the last millennium, I have to say, it was just a totally different landscape, and we were just at the beginning of the enormous expansion that it's seen over the years. And I think there are good things about that expansion. There are bad things about that expansion. I mean, on the positive side, it's just enabled many more authors to publish. It's enabled many more authors to become authors and to get their work out there. It's also meant that publishing in general has had to adapt and has had to really accept that the old school sort of gatekeeper model isn't necessarily the only model of publishing that exists, and that there are other ways to publish. On the downside, it's meant the absolutely enormous proliferation of books and e-books and now audiobooks, and there are so many things to read out there that it's just become so difficult to get noticed, and it's even harder to find something.
To find something of quality.
Well, to find something of quality, that's always going to be the problem. And I sort of feel that quality is always actually going to come to the fore at some stage or another. But just even finding something that's not of quality is difficult. And that's impacted upon commercial publishers as well as self-publishers, and it's one of the big challenges that we face moving forward. And there are other challenges moving forward as well, I think, which are maybe not quite so significant, but they face anybody who's considering publishing their own work. They're challenges that they're going to face, and they're along similar lines of discoverability and quality, and in particular is always something I always go on about is quality of what you produce. I was judging the Barbara Hammond self-published book trophy just last month up in Scotland, and I was quite dismayed really at the quality of what had been published, what had been self-published, and surprised, because in this day and age, it doesn't have to be like it doesn't have to be like it used to be.
There's little excuse for it now, yeah.
There isn't, no, and it's, I don't know, it's that sort of disconnect, I think, between what people are as writers and what they do as writing, which is very valid and very legitimate. But then there's an enormous leap between writing and getting the writing right and publishing. And I still think that far too many authors don't understand that publishing is actually different to writing. Publishing is a commercial activity, generally. And in order to compete on what everybody agrees is a very, very difficult commercial landscape, in order to compete there, you're competing with the big boys. You're not just competing with other self-publishers. So I was surprised that there is still so much lack of understanding that is the case.
I think the other element, which is kind of there more and more now than it necessarily was back in, say, the 1990s, or even the early part of the millennium, is that it's the ease and the immediacy and the speed to publish now, which some authors see, and that sometimes can actually be the downfall. The rush, not getting things right. We always say that yes, the cream and the quality will always come to the top, but it's even from my experiences as a publishing consultant, there's nothing more disheartening to read an author's work, and specifically a published author's work, to read the work and go, that is actually a fabulous book, but there are a number of elements that are wrong with the packaging, the book itself, not the content, and you go, it's such a shame,
right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I was doing a session on this conference in Glasgow a couple of weeks back, and I'm always saying, get your writing right. The writing and the content is the bedrock of any decent book, but you've got to look at the presentation, and it's not just presentation. It's not just having a good front cover. Obviously that helps, but it's having a good back cover. It's making sure that your book's printed on the right paper. It's making sure that your book's been typeset properly and it's not full of errors. There's also things, more fundamental things, like who's your audience, because if you walk into a Waterston's, they don't want a book there's something in it for everybody. They want a book that's a thriller, or they want a romance, or they want something that's easier to sell. Yeah. And as the author, you've also got a responsibility to your audience to target that audience and to write for your audience. I would never suggest anybody should write something that they don't want to write, but you can still have an eye on your target audience whilst writing. Because it's going to make your job of publishing and selling much easier down the road, and if that's what you want as an author, which obviously a lot do, but it's that disconnect I said earlier between spending hours and hours and months and days, years and years sometimes on getting the writing right, and then producing it in a way which basically is guaranteed to make it sink. An author who says to me, I don't really care about the cover. The work will speak for itself. That's nonsense, because nobody's going to read your work because nobody's going to pick it up. It's that sort of lack of understanding of, I guess, basic commerciality, but also just how humans are with these things. People judge a book by its cover, and they won't pick something up. It has a terrible cover, and
that's the truth. I know it's sometimes thrown around it as an analogy, but in the opposite meaning. But actually, no, it does matter. A cover on a book does matter. The quality of a book does matter inside and out.
Yeah,
Jeremy, I suppose let's tie that now a little bit into going back to Troubador. You were going a number of years, and then I think, am I right, towards was it the mid-1990s, 95, 96, Matador, the self-publishing imprint, arrived?
It was just slightly later than that.
Okay.
I mean, 96, Troubador actually became a company, and for various reasons we had a different name before that, but we had to call it something else. So in 1996 it became a company. I guess I started thinking about offering some sort of self-publishing, some sort of, and at the time I'll admit freely, it was thinking of vanity publishing, some sort of vanity publishing service in about 97, 98. Mm-hmm. And that was really in response to the fact that we'd become known locally as a local publisher, and authors were starting to just literally knock on the door and saying, "Look, can you publish my book?" And of course, they didn't produce. Most of those authors didn't have Italian studies books or academic. They had biographies or a book of poems or something. So that sort of got me thinking, and I did a bit of research, and the internet literally was just in its relative infancy in the late 90s, and I started seeing this sort of vanity thing, and I didn't really like that. I'd known about it beforehand, but there was this sort of phrase, self-publishing, which was coming from the States really, and I just began to think about, actually, there's no reason why this couldn't be done. As long as it's done properly, as long as it's done well. And I think that sort of thought formulated over a period of about 18 months until the point where we sort of tested the water by taking on a book which somebody who literally walked into the door had asked us to publish and said, well, I'll pay you to publish it. And so we published the book, and I remember it was called The A to Z of Animal Facts. And it was all about, it was sort of a book on animal cruelty and anti-animal cruelty, and that's the first book we ever published, having been paid to publish, and it sold really well. I think she sold 1,000 copies, fairly straight off. So that was really the motivation for doing it, because I felt that there was a market there, and as a relatively small company, I thought, well, yes, we could offer something here. It's within my skill set. I know how to produce books. I know how to market books and sell books. Why not offer that to people who are never going to get a publishing deal? So that's really how it started. You
made an inference there that I picked up on, and you made a reference to this kind of new technology or new way of publishing that was coming from the United States, and I think that kind of arrived and really sort of hit in the UK market in and around 99, 2000, and of course the inference to it was print on demand. So just for anybody who's maybe unsure, just give us a broad scope of that, because it's now a part of the fundamental basis of and why self-publishing, if done properly, can work.
Well, I mean, there are different ways of actually publishing, and I think, again, if you'd asked most people 5 years ago, what is self-publishing, they would automatically have thought self-publishing is print on demand, which is effectively where a book exists on a computer server at a big printer's, and somebody orders a copy on an online retailer like Amazon. The order goes to the printer, it's printed by the printer, and it's sent to the customer, and it takes about 3 days. So you don't actually have any books sitting on a shelf waiting.
Warehousing costs.
No warehousing costs. None of that comes into it. Your return is a lot less, but your costs are a lot less. So it's a good way of sort of testing the water, getting a book out there. And a lot of authors do it, and many authors do it. If you'd asked people about what is self-publishing in the last few years, a lot would have said it's an e-book, because that was the latest thing that came along, and maybe we'll touch upon that later. But interestingly enough, we don't, as Matador, our big market is not print on demand. Most of our authors actually want to go down the other road, which is they do print books in advance, so they'll print a relatively short print run, sort of 300 or 300 copies, 500 copies, because what that enables you to do is what commercial publishers do, and that's actually get books onto bookshop shelves, and bookshops sell a lot of books.
And that's always been the key to what Matador offers. It's that sense of, this is not just about having a book. Yeah. It's about selling that book. It's about getting it to physical bookstores, as well as just having it online for the sake of it being online.
Yeah. That's exactly right. I mean, I think going back to what I was saying earlier about vanity publishing is about having a book, and vanity publishers exploited people because people wanted to have a book, and they thought it was going to be easy to sell it, and of course it isn't. That's the hard part. So certain companies could and did exploit people for huge amounts of money, absolutely obscene amounts of money in some cases. But what I didn't want to do, I mean, I went into publishing as a career, and I didn't go into publishing to produce bad books badly. I went into publishing to produce books that I can be proud of. And although it's not my book, although it's been written by an author, my company still produced it for that author, and I don't want rubbish to be out there on the bookshop shelves. And neither do the retailers, because believe me, the retailers are very quick to tell us, what are you trying to sell us this pile of old whatever for, and that happened in the early days. It really did. And literally, I can remember a discussion at the book fair at the London Book Fair with one of the buyers from the wholesalers Gardeners, and he berated me, in the aisle at the London Book Fair, and that was a lesson learned, that actually if you're going to do this, you're going to have to do it well, because otherwise people are not going to take notice. So you're right. Underpinning everything we do is not just producing a quality book, which other people can do, lots of other people can do, but it's actually selling it and distributing it and trying to do the best we can to get it out there so that people are reading it. And that's really where we differ, I think, from most other self-publishing companies. There are some out there who do some on parts of what we do, but I'm not sure there's many in the UK at least that actually do everything we do. Yeah,
no, I totally agree. I think we've right back since one of the self-publishing conferences we were at, I know we discussed this, and well, let's just touch upon it slightly from your perspective. Obviously, you've got Troubador, you're building the Matador imprint, you're starting, to establish yourself as a leading company, and the various different ways you're working with authors. You're coming at it initially in the initial setup from the UK market, and we've sort of touched on this in many conversations we've had, both online and in person. For you, what's the difference between the US market, obviously apart from size, obviously, and the UK market? Do you see subtle differences? I've tended from a very early to kick off from a very early stage. I've always felt that one, in Ireland and the UK, self-publishing from a very early stage, even in the 1960s and 1970s, was a little bit more accepted in those markets than it necessarily was in the US. So that was the first subtle difference. And also, not just about size, I think size, of course, yes, the UK market is a lot smaller, but I still feel that in the UK it offers, if you like, higher quality providers who are a little bit more savvy about, the market in which they work. Yeah. But your own thoughts on the US market.
I think that's probably true. I mean, I think the difference, one of the big differences in the UK is I just think that, with no disrespect to our US cousins, I just think perhaps the UK has always had a reputation as a centre of publishing excellence.
1 million people now have just switched off there.
Well, I do apologise, but it's true, because I currently work for a company, we produce some publications for a company that's based out in Australia, but they could publish themselves, but they want the books to be published with the UK, in the UK, because they see that it's having that sort of cachet. And I think historically that has been the case, and maybe still is. If you look at the publishers around the world, a lot of them, the big names, are still British, effectively. And I think that certainly from a self-publishing point of view, that certainly has a knock-on. I also think that a lot of, because of the nature of the UK market, and because it isn't actually that big, it's 65 million people living in the UK, it's not enormous. Companies in this country, maybe they've had to try a little bit harder in order to convince their audience, which is a relatively limited audience, that what they're doing is actually legitimate and of good quality. Whereas with the market the size of the US, which is absolutely enormous, perhaps there's just so many customers, there's so many people, interested in self-publishing, that they don't have to work quite so hard. Perhaps that's unfair, I don't know, but I tend to agree with you that yes, there is a slight difference between the UK market and other markets, certainly.
Yeah, no, it's I've always found it fascinating that, I mean, essentially, of course, it doesn't matter the size of the market, it's the same. But again, and I suppose that's reflective as well of always when you talk to authors about selling their book, in a sense, publishing is no different. You have to understand your market, and each market has its own subtle differences, and if you don't understand that, you're making it harder for yourself to.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in the UK, again, I mean, and it probably applies to the US as well. But what we do effectively as a commercial publisher is we do what any other commercial publisher does, but we do it for our self-publishing authors. So we do have that distribution set up. We do have the distributors. We do have a sales force. We do have relationships with buyers and retailers. Those are the things that are really hard to get. It's relatively straightforward to produce a book, but actually getting it into the market, and not just on getting it out there onto Amazon, so that people can buy a print-on-demand copy, but actually physically getting it out there, getting buyers in retailers to say, yes, I will take some copies of this and take a punt. Those are the things that are really hard to do, and it took us years. It took us 5 to 10 years really to get any of those organisations to take us really at all seriously, and yet we're still building on that. We're still having to reinforce that all the time. That look at what we're producing. This is quality. This is well produced. This is well written. It's at the right price. It has the right cover. We still have to go through that mantra sometimes with new buyers in retailers. But it's got better over the years. But I think for a lot of self-publishing companies, and particularly those that do print on demand, they don't have to do all that, because really they produce the book, and then the end for them is that it's on Amazon, and it's really up to the world to go and buy it, and up to the author to go out and market it.
Just you touched on that whole idea as well, and reflecting back on Troubador and Matador. And that building process and the expansion that's happened. Just talk to us around a few of the sort of different things that you've done. We'll talk about the Book Guild shortly. But first of all, this is one thing, and me, I spend an awful lot of time having a look at companies. But one thing that I'd missed is, are you still doing the Indigo services? Is that website still going? What was the idea behind that?
Yeah, I mean the Indigo thing. I mean, I'm always looking at the market, and I'm always looking at what opportunities are there, what else can we do. I mean, and one of our real sort of bedrocks of what we do is to try and get things for authors that they can't get elsewhere, or to try and get things for authors that they can get elsewhere, but to try and provide them more cheaply, because we can get discounts from suppliers and that sort of stuff. So that's one of the things we always try to do. Indigo really came about as a result of a look at the market and seeing that there was a distinct trend towards authors doing it themselves, but trying to do it themselves better. And by that I mean the print-on-demand services, for example, things like Ingram Spark coming along, and CreateSpace expanding or becoming CreateSpace. People needed a proper cover designing. People needed a proper copy edit, or they needed a proper critique. They were going to do the production and the distribution and whatever of their book themselves, but they needed a supplier to provide that bang on cover, and they needed a supplier to provide a copy edit, for example. So we created Indigo really as a response to that. So we still use our design skills and our copy editing skills, etc., through Indigo, but any author can come to us if they're going to publish anywhere else, if they want to publish on CreateSpace, or they want to publish with any service they like anywhere in the world. If they come to us and they want a cover, we'll do them a cover, and that's the end of it. And that was in response really to that sort of market segment which I saw was increasing.
The other thing, we'll talk shortly about the Book Guild, but just before that, one of the other programs, if you like, that you've developed, well, a couple of them. Two of them I'll mention is the self-publishing conference. Tell us just a little bit the background around that. That started in, I think, 2012, didn't it? Was the first year?
It started in 2012. Yeah, I mean, it's an annual event that happens up in at the University of Leicester. It's sort of in the middle of the UK, and we get about 120 authors coming to it every year, it grew out of we've always done things like newsletters and email newsletters, that sort of thing, and we've always tried to inform authors about how we think things should be done, or how we think things are done in the commercial publishing world, and how that impacts upon self-publishers. We've always tried to inform authors whether or not they're going to publish with us or not. We always wanted to make lots of information available, and we've done that through the website. We've done that through other things we've done. At one point, we had a print magazine which we published and made available, and the conference sort of grew out of that because we felt there was room in the UK for an event at which we could get speakers in from all sorts of different organisations. We could run practical workshops, like how to write a press release or how to write good back cover blurb, that sort of stuff, at which anybody can come along. Again, they're not. Most of these delegates are not publishing with us. They're either looking at self-publishing, or they're publishing with other people, or they have published elsewhere and they're still publishing elsewhere, but they just want information. So we sort of launched it really as a means of doing that. And it's become really quite successful, and it's sort of it's in its sixth year now. The number 6 is back end of this month, so we're looking forward to that, and it seems to have worked. I mean, we get good feedback from delegates, and quite a few delegates have come back more than once. One
of the other areas, again, we'll refer to it as a program, I suppose, that you tried out. I know Hillcrest Media did a little bit of this as well, and it's an excellent thing that I think all good quality self-publishing services should consider, because it gives a background to the company. And that is, I think what you initially called them, I can't even remember the company you did this in line with, but these were what you call self-publishing experience days. So prospective authors or whatever would come. So tell just a little bit about that, what the idea behind that and how it worked.
Yeah, same sort of thing, really. I mean, again, it's just about informing, educating, meeting and discussing. And in the early days, when we were offering self-publishing, we used to get authors coming to the office actually just to make sure that we existed, that we weren't someone in the back room, and we were a proper company.
Virtual company.
We had an office. But and actually, I think that probably still happens today to an extent. But there was obviously a need for people to come along and learn about the process of self-publishing and how it works, what to do, what not to do, pitfalls, good practice, bad practice, etc. So we started by offering what we call self-publishing experience days, where people come to the office and the staff here we have a program through the day, and the staff will talk about all the different various stages. We have a tour of the facility. People can look in the warehouse, and they can look at the offices, and they can talk to the members of staff about what they do. And it's really fruitful. And some authors will publish with us, and some authors have already published with us, and some authors won't publish with us. And it's sort of not really about that. It's more just to use our expertise and impart that knowledge to as many people as we possibly can. We make a charge of £10, £10 per person, and that really just covers the food that we provide at lunchtime. So it's not a profit making thing. One of the things we're going to be doing next year is probably expanding that program. But I'll come on to that later on, because I'm sure you're going to ask me about what we're going to do in the future. So you've described an awful lot about the setup of Troubador and Matador, but of course the first big jump for you was leaving a company that you worked for, setting up your own company, building this out, and then all the expansion that goes with it. But part of that expansion, I think, was a big step for you then, because you decided that you weren't just going to set up another imprint or to fit whatever a market or whatever. Talk to me about the thoughts in your mind when you sort of looked at this other company, the Book Guild. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, again, it was a response to looking at how the market was developing for author-assisted publishing, and there was I'd seen a trend for really quite high quality, higher end publishing, where the publisher and the author were sharing the risk, effectively sort of partnership publishing. It's a difficult area, because there are some companies that call themselves partnership publishers who effectively just charge the author what a self-publishing company would, and that's not wholly honest, I don't think. But there is a genuine area where you see a book which you think, this has got really good commercial legs, I'd like to have a piece of that. And we couldn't do that under Matador. We couldn't really do it under Troubador because it has different imprints, and Matador has a different way of working. So really buying the Book Guild was a response to that, because the Book Guild was partly offering some of this, and it was partly offering a commercial mainstream, entirely publisher funded model, which it does still offer. Again, if we see a book which we feel for the Book Guild is really commercial, and we feel we're going to take a punt on it, we'll take a risk on it, then we'll fund the whole thing and we'll do it ourselves, and just give it a traditional publishing deal. So that was really the thinking behind it, is that I think the part of the market is going that way, and absolutely no reason why we shouldn't be involved.
So we were that was part of more of the expansion. That happened. Is it 2-3 years ago now?
2015, so 3 years ago. Yeah.
But essentially, the Book Guild is still a separate company and operates in an independent manner. Yeah.
It's an entirely independent company. It's a different company, legally and financially and everything, and it operates differently. The staff are based in the same building here, but they are different staff. And it operates as a separate company. And I have to say, there were pros and cons of doing it that way. It would have been much easier just to make it an imprint, as you say. But I think for all sorts of reasons, it needs to be run as a different company. And the Book Guild. And be more distinct. And in fact, as a company, one of the reasons why we bought that particular company was because it did have a reasonably good reputation amongst the retail trade. At the time, I don't think it had a particularly good reputation with some authors, but with the retailers, it had a really good name. So that was why we decided to buy the Book Guild.
We've talked so much about the past, what's currently happening. So for you, where are the developments for you in general, for Troubador and Matador? What's coming up in the future? And then perhaps if we can maybe talk a little bit then about in general about where we see self-publishing going and the general publishing industry. Sure. But to start with current developments and future developments.
Well, I think you probably know we've literally just overhauled our website, which was 8 years old and beginning to get a bit clunky. So that's how much time does doing a website take? Honestly, it took a year to overhaul. So I've had a holiday after that because I did my bit there. So that was a really big project that we've had really been going for the last year. The next big project we've got is an interesting one because it's not something that anybody's ever done before. We are going to be launching a mobile bookshop probably in the summer. We've bought a Citroen H van, which is currently being converted into a mobile bookshop, and we're going to be taking that around to festivals and local fetes and really any sort of event, literary festivals, that sort of thing. And so we're going to be selling our books, Matador, Troubador, and Book Guild books. We're going to be selling them direct to people. Really, because we want to have a way of getting out to meet people, getting out to sell our books, and selling more books, really. And then I think this is just a different way of doing it.
Yeah, to coin a phrase, it's certainly a novel way of doing it. But if it works, if it sounds like a good idea, it probably is a good idea. And it's an interesting mix, isn't it, of kind of historically where part of the industry used to be, we all remember the library vans and trucks, and so it's kind of like taking that idea, isn't it, but bringing it to different locales and festivals and what have you. So that I wish you well with that. That sounds an excellent idea.
Well, we'll either sell a lot of books or we won't sell a lot of books. But I think
we'll end up spending an awful lot on petrol and diesel.
Well, we're spending a lot on petrol and staff probably. But I mean, I just think it's a good I think it's a good thing to try because it's going to be a novelty. I mean, we could have gone out and bought a transit van and done it, but we've bought a sort of historical looking French van. You see them at all the festivals with selling coffee and pizzas and whatnot, and it's going to be different. And I think different can be good sometimes. Different can work sometimes. But we're quite excited because I think it's going to be a new it's a new venture for us, and we'll see how it goes. I mean, the other big thing that's happening this year is that we're going to be moving offices because the offices we're in and the two warehouses we have here we've really outgrown them. We're very lucky that our landlord here is effectively building us a new building just literally down the road. So we're going to put everything into one building, and at the same time we'll expand by about a third. From our author's point of view, obviously that's good news, but it also means that we're going to be able to offer more events because we're deliberately going to be building in an event space. So we mentioned the self-publishing experience piece, so we're going to do more of those, but we're also going to probably I think we are going to start a series of workshops on anything from writing to editing to doing audiobooks to doing ebooks, and anything. We will have the space, we'll have the facilities, and we'll be able to expand that sort of side of the program that we run, once we're in the building.
And in the wider terms, in general, where self-publishing is going, we seem to be. I talked to Paul Cohen about this, and your own thoughts and other things about this interesting rise of audiobooks, which is something that I didn't think we'd see. I kind of sort of thought it had its heyday, audiobooks, of the old sort of cassettes we used to have, and then it went to CD. I thought that had its day kind of like in the late 80s, early 90s, but we're seeing a huge resurgence, almost like on the back of the success of ebooks, but now audiobooks are really exploding.
Yeah, I mean, I think possibly the main motivator behind that is the launch of things like Amazon's Alexa and the Apple Home Hub and that sort of thing, where people have these devices that they just talk to, and they can, and like the radio they're on and they listen to, and I think that's one of the big motivational drivers for this. I've like yourself, Mick, I mean, I've never really felt that audiobooks was a market that we needed to be in. Again, it's not a book really. It's you're producing a radio program, you're producing an audio program, and that wasn't our area of expertise. But we are now actually next month going to be launching an audiobook service, which, as you'd expect, is going to be a really good quality audiobook service with professional actors and recording and whatnot. We're not going to be doing it by halves. It's going to be done properly. But again, whether it's going to succeed on a commercial basis, I don't know. But I think it's a market. It's an interesting market, should we say, and it's a market I think that there is room for growth in, certainly.
And in general, other developments, or where do you think self-publishing is going to go?
I think I don't think there's going to be anything sort of dramatic and drastic. I'll probably rue the day I said that, but I don't think there's anything going to be really dramatic happening. I think that the landscape for self-publishing has been mapped out, and it's been mapped out from the print on demand all the way through to the audiobook at the other end, and I think it's just a question of within that players coming and going and services perhaps changing. It would be nice to see the wider book retail trade accepting more that good self-published books are just like any other books. That's a battle which we still have to fight, and I know that the Alliance of Independent Authors are always trying to get bookshops to sit up and take note of that. I think that's a laudable aim, because that's where the market is, and as long as it's a good book, who cares who or how it's been published? It's just got to be a well-written, a well-presented book. So I think that's one of the big challenges we face, but it's not a new challenge. It's just an ongoing challenge.
Yeah, like it's a fascinating time to get into self-publishing, and really it has been for the last 10 years. I think you're right in regards. You described it as a mapping. Yeah, I think the map is now drawn. It's more down to behaviour. That we're always going to have new technology. That's going to come along. Book apps, whatever. But essentially, I think you're right. Yeah, I don't see too much changing. other than technology will improve. Perhaps maybe the retail landscape might shift slightly, but I'm not quite sure how it will shift because there's so much uncertainty.
I think you'll probably find there's a whole fleet of book vans out there selling books at festivals before too long.
Yeah, there you go.
Be a big I wish.
Jeremy, just before we finish up, I always ask this question, and sometimes it catches people out because they go, I didn't really think of that, or, what is the quirkiest, weirdest, oddest things or experiences that you've had sort of throughout all your years of developing and expanding Troubador and Matador, be it with suppliers, authors, or curiosities that have happened?
I think it's not going to be one thing. It's a collection of things, and most of them are authors. Authors are people, and every single author is different. I mean, I've had an author come in for a meeting, literally clutching a shoebox full of £20 notes because they wanted to pay me in cash, and then I had £2,000 in a Tupperware box. I've had an author coming from Jamaica who's given me a hands-on health reading, which was somewhat unexpected.
As part payment.
And no, this was free, but I was almost joining in on the sing along. It was an experience, shall we say? It's just that so many different authors come in, and they have so many different things, different quirks about them, and being people, they're all so different. I love meeting authors who come in. I love talking to them. But just now and again, you get one that you think, what on earth was that? And that's really the thing that sticks out for me as being the oddest.
Jeremy, just before we finish, I think I was going to ask you this because when we talked, I think it was last week, you said, why do you want to interview me? Don't you do lots of interviews with aircraft people? So what's this about? What is he going to ask me questions about this? And
it's an odd sort of.
It is, but it's weirdly worked, as I said. Funny, two of the pilots I've spoken to on programs actually are self-published authors. Which is so there's a weird crossover, and of course there's a weird crossover with you, which I didn't know, despite how long I've known you. Right. I didn't know that you had a pilot's license, that this is one of your activities you like to get up to when you get a chance on a weekend or whatever. How did that come about? Yeah. Just that you've just always had an interest, or?
No, I haven't. I mean, it's just one of those things, isn't it? I mean, it came about purely by chance. In fact, my wife and I bought my son for his 18th birthday a trial flight in a Cessna at the local airfield. He was 18. He wanted to go into the RAF at the time, like a lot of 18-year-old boys. We thought, actually give him a trial. So he went up in it and did it, and he loved it. And I thought, that looks interesting. I could do that. So I went along and did the same thing, and I got hooked. I'd had no ambition ever to be sort of a commercial pilot or do it for a living or anything like that. It's purely for fun. But yeah, it's I love it. It's just living in the UK. It's all weather dependent, and there you go. Haven't been up for 6 weeks.
Now put the idea in your head. He knows what he's doing this weekend.
Well, not this weekend either.
Jeremy Thompson from Matador and Troubador, it has been, as always, a pleasure to talk to you. And thank you for joining us today on Radio Espial. And we'll catch up soon. Take care.
Thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Radio Espial. We explore and discover together.
Okay, thank you to Jeremy Thompson from Troubador Publishing for joining us today. I hope you enjoyed the interview. I'll catch up with you all again. Remember, www.radioespial.com. You can find all our links to where we podcast and broadcast on the website. I will talk to you again soon, and thank you for joining me.